everyone. How you doing? First, I'll explain a bit about what the exchange program is. There's a 3-month exchange program and a 1-year exchange program. I was part of the 1-year exchange program, which is an indirect exchange, so there wasn't an exchange student from Brazil that came to my house. It was simply I went to Brazil and a Brazilian student came to Canada somewhere else. I'm not actually sure where they ended up. Short-term exchanges, 3 months, and it's a direct exchange. So say you wanted to go to France, you would go to France, someone from France would come and live in your house, you would do that for 3 months, and then you would go back. I chose the 1-year exchange because I don't know how many of you guys are in the grade 11 area, which is where I was when I decided to do the exchange, but I was at the point where I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life after high school, and I wanted an excuse to stay back for a year. So I decided to leave the country. It seemed easy enough. So to talk a little bit about traveling and to be a stranger in a foreign country, overall, I love the experience. I highly recommend it. If you've ever thought about doing an exchange, I 100% will talk you through the whole thing. I can tell you what you need to do or anything like that. It's a great experience overall, but they'll explain it to you if you ever go to an orientation. It's a roller coaster. You have your ups and your downs, and there's a lot of places in between where you're unsure of what's going to happen. To me, that was part of the appeal of it. I actually had never chosen to go to Brazil. My countries of choice were, I think, Switzerland, Sweden, and Denmark. And then I wasn't the originally chosen exchange student, so originally I didn't think I was going to go, and then I got a call one morning asking if I wanted to go to Brazil. And so I wasn't going to pass up the opportunity to travel because it's what I've been wanting to do. So then I ended up in a country which I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about the language. I knew nothing about the people. Basically had 3 months to pack all of my things into a suitcase and buy a visa and get out of the country. So little bit strange under the circumstances, but like overall I had a great time. I've kind of split it up, and I think there's probably 3 parts about being a stranger in a foreign country. First part is arrival. You get there, and it's pretty much the same with anything, whether you're going to a new school, or you're going to a new neighborhood, or you're going away to university. Any situation where you're in a new area, you've got feelings of nervousness, anxiousness, you're afraid to fail, you've got all this built up, and especially I noticed between the guys of exchange, no one really wanted to act homesick. No one wanted to be afraid. And it was pretty kind of sad almost because we were all very happy to be there and none of us wanted to complain, but at the same time, all of us were very, very homesick. And we were scared because it's a bunch of 16 to 18-year-old guys just kind of hanging out with a bunch of other random people that 3 months ago you didn't know, and all of a sudden you're becoming best friends because you don't know anyone there. And the only language you all speak is English, and some better than others. Like there's people that were in my district that I almost didn't talk to because we didn't speak the same language until the last couple months when we were both fluent in Portuguese. So there's a very large stigma around traveling that it's this kind of scary thing, and it is, but as long as you're willing to embrace that fear and that anxiousness, it can be a really, really fun thing to be a stranger. And that kind of goes into the second part, which is getting settled in. So I would say after about 2 months of being in Brazil, I was able to speak fairly broken Portuguese, which, by the way, is their most common language. Some people speak Spanish, but that's kind of, well, they were illegal immigrants that would speak Spanish. So if anyone ever came up to you speaking Spanish, you kind of knew that they weren't from Brazil. They were usually from Argentina or Paraguay. And so after about 2 months, because my host family didn't speak any English and no one in my club for Rotary spoke English, so for those first 2 months I was basically completely alone. There was no other exchange students in my area. I think the closest one was about an hour and a half away if I wanted to go and hang out with anyone, and there was one person at my school that spoke English. So I had to pick up a new language that I knew nothing about very, very quickly. And because of that, I was actually pretty happy with that because I was able to speak fluently and be more independent a lot sooner, which is a huge part about being a foreigner in a different country or anywhere, is just being able to communicate. And if you don't have that communication, you end up putting walls around yourself. And it can be a pretty sad thing because one of our exchange students ended up getting sent home because they felt he wasn't participating enough. He didn't like to leave his house. He didn't like talking to people. He didn't like to express himself because he couldn't. he didn't speak the language, and he wasn't willing to learn. So that's another huge hurdle that you have to pass over once you become a stranger. But again, once you get over those, it can be a really great time. So once I was able to speak the language, I was kind of able to go back to what you would consider a normal teenage life. I could tell my parents, my host parents, I was going out. I could be on my own. They trusted me. We had a very understanding relationship between us, and I was very grateful for that, because I know there was many exchange students that had a lot of problems with their host families. They couldn't talk to them. They didn't know what to say to them. They didn't know what the rules were, and that's all a part of getting over those hurdles that you experience when you are a stranger, right? And you have to imagine, like you're trusting yourself to go into someone's house, and they're trusting you to come into their house and be a member of their family, essentially. It's not just staying there and you sleep there and then you leave in the morning. You spend a lot of time with these people, and especially during my first 2 months when I wasn't out as often, I was spending upwards of 20 hours a day just with the same people that I had no idea who they were, really. By the end of it, we ended up being like really great friends, and I still talk to them, and they've been really excited to make me come back to Brazil, and they want me to go back to Brazil, and I would like to go back as well, but just to have that relationship between them was a really good thing that I know not everyone is privileged to have. And so making relationships when you are a foreigner is one of the first things you need to try and do. You need to focus that you're making sure happens. Otherwise, you end up alone. And some people do like to be alone. I personally am a bit of an extrovert, so I didn't want to just be like talking to myself or talking to a wall for 24 hours a day. The other thing is, this is a talk about brought to you by the bringing awareness to racism. A lot of my friends there, or a lot of the friends that I had that weren't through school, none of them actually knew my name, or none of them could pronounce my name. Sean, the SH sound in Sean isn't a very common, I guess, verb, tense? I'm not sure. But no one was able to really pronounce it. They said Shane, they said Sheen a lot, but none of them could pronounce it, so I got called Gringo, which is stranger. So for almost an entire year, I didn't go by my actual name to probably 50% of my friends. I went as stranger. So if we're gonna talk about, and Gringo there is actually one of their racial slurs. So you can imagine half the day I'm getting called a racial slur, not realizing it, only realizing it probably halfway through my exchange that it's not a good thing. But you come to accept it, and you come to be okay with the fact that like some people aren't really going to understand what it's like, because a lot of the kids that I met were not only younger than me, but they were also a lot less privileged than I was. And when I say that, I mean I was living in a city where I think the official population was 500,000, but when I went to, I talked with, I wasn't the mayor, it was, I forget, it was the district of my city. He was one of the people that keeps track of the population, and I think between everyone that wasn't a legalized citizen, so there, to be a legal citizen, you have to have it's a card, and it basically just says you're a Brazilian citizen, you are a person. There was about 1 million people in my district of the city that didn't have that card. So imagine growing up in Dryden, you've never gone to school, you've never met anyone, you've never met any of the friends that go to school, you've never talked to any of the people that go to school, you barely speak the same language because the dialects are so different, and there's 1 million of those. So there was a huge problem with discrimination, there's a huge problem with violence, there's a huge problem with undereducation, and you don't know that those problems exist outside of Canada, because we're so lucky to have the facilities that we have, that I'm able to come here and talk to you guys, and in a library that's heated. My school in Brazil didn't have a computer lab. The walls were all brick. The desks were probably a bit too small for almost half the people in there. They didn't have a big gym. They had a little soccer court with some concrete bleachers built into the wall. The entire school was falling apart. And on top of that, the entire school was inside of a wall because it's not safe enough to have kids playing outside in the streets. So these are the problems that other people in different parts of the world are facing on a day-to-day basis, and we're here sitting in a library eating Brazilian treats. There's a lot of different things that add up to being a stranger in a different country, and getting used to a different culture. So once I arrived there and I saw all these things happening, it was, you go into culture shock. You don't think you would, but you immediately go into culture shock as soon as you see like a homeless person walking down the streets that doesn't know their own name. It's a really crazy experience. And so once you become accustomed to that, and once you're kind of comparing it to your life, you're realizing how great of a life you're actually living and how privileged you are to be there on a trip and not stuck there like a lot of people were. And so, like, not to say I didn't like my city, I was not in a good area of the city. I will say that. There was exchange students that weren't allowed to come and visit me in my area because it was said to be an area that was too filled with crime or too violent. And I saw that a lot. There was a couple times where I would be walking down the street and someone got hit by a car and no one batted an eye. And yeah, you heard the gasp over there. It was a really serious problem. There was a lot of police everywhere. There was a lot of gun violence. There was a lot of racial violence. There was a lot of gang wars. And it was terrifying. I was really scared for the first 2 months of my exchange. I wasn't almost allowed to leave the house. It was a really scary thing because at the same time all these problems were going on, there was also the impeachment of the Brazilian government. And for those of you that don't know what impeachment is, it's basically the public saying we don't want this government anymore. So on top of all the local issues and crime rates that were in my city, I was dealing with the fact that the country I'd been sent to on exchange was no longer going to have a government for a little bit. So there was problems, but you get over them. You work your way through them, you do it day by day, and overall, I had one of the greatest experiences of my life. And it was different than a lot of other experiences. I think Jackie Grandmont is in France right now. She's eating baguettes underneath the Eiffel Tower. Great place to be right now. I'm pretty sure she's loving it. Sarah Wood, also an exchange student in Brazil. She's living on a beach and her tan is crazy. I don't know if any of you have her on Instagram, but it's wild. Like chocolate olives colored. It's great. That wasn't my exchange. I had a different time. But I still enjoyed it just as much as they would. I met people that I would have never met if I hadn't had the chance to go. And overall, I still highly recommend exchange, even though some people hear about what I went through and they're like, why would you want to do that again? I would do it again in a heartbeat because I think overall I came out of it a better person. I came out of it with a better understanding of different cultures, and it was a really great time. Which brings me to the final point, which is leaving. Leaving Brazilian culture and coming back to Canada was probably a lot easier than it was for some of the exchange students who went to European countries where they were living with families who had yachts that they would take out on the weekend. For me, I ate beans and rice every single day of the year for 11 months, which I'm so done with. I haven't even looked at a plate of rice ever since then. I'm just done with it. So for me, coming back was a little bit easier. For other people, it's kind of more difficult. You've met these amazing people while you've been there. Over here, this was my host mother. She made me cry when I was leaving the airport because she was crying so much. I think for about the 3 days before, there was about 2 hours of each day that was designated to crying about me leaving. Sweetest lady I could ever meet in my life. She calls me on every single occasion. I don't know how she knows them. She's called me on my birthday. She's called me on my dad's birthday, my mom's birthday. She called me on Father's Day and Mother's Day. I love Alison here to death. My host father is right here in this picture and also here. He was actually the chief of police in my city district. So at first he was very, very strict about his rules. He was like, this is what's gonna go, this is what isn't gonna go. And also I was their first exchange student. They had never really been through any of this before. They had never even really met anyone that was from Canada. They didn't really know what Canada was. One person I said, I'm from Canada, and they said, what state is that? Or what state is that next to? And I had to explain to them that Canada is actually a separate country. And then the final person in my host family was this little guy right here. His name was, well, we pronounce it Raphael, but they don't have the R sound, so it's Raphael. So that was the family that I was living with for probably 8 months of my exchange. And so to be living with someone for 8 months, you get to know them really well. You're sleeping under their roof, you eat almost every meal with them, you see them suffer, you see yourself suffer, you get through it together, and overall it was probably one of the best relationships I've ever had with any people in general ever. And so I still have a great relationship with them, we still talk, and because of them I was able to make it through my exchange without as many problems as the other ones did. So you can imagine I've become so connected to these people, and then just to have to leave them to go 10,000 kilometers north back to negative, what was it, like 27 the other day? Yeah, like, just to leave them to come back to this, for me, was probably the hardest part. The culture itself, I love Brazil. The area I was in, I loved it. I was in district of Sao Paulo, which is I think either the 3rd or the 5th biggest city in the world. So to go from Dryden to that was pretty crazy. But for me, the hardest part about leaving was to leave all the people that I made friends with and the people that I connected with behind. So those are probably like the 3 parts of traveling and being a foreigner that I'm sure everyone has had to go through, and to a lesser extent, I'm sure this happens even when you go to a different school. It'll probably happen when you go to university. I don't know how many of you guys are graduating next year or leaving or going to work somewhere else, but you're gonna have to go through hurdles like this, and to be a stranger somewhere is scary, but as long as you're willing to accept it, and as long as you're willing to take a step back and kind of push through it on your own, I know everyone in here could definitely do an exchange all on their own. I know we have a foods class in here, which, by the way, thank you for all the food. You guys did a great job. I figured I would talk a little bit about the food. Beans and rice, every single day, every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's all for food. Difference is, they only eat beans and rice. And I'm not exaggerating this at all. They only eat beans and rice. There's chicken sometimes, there's meat sometimes. Other than that, all beans and rice all the time. And then they have like little snack foods between, kind of like tea time for them, but it's usually like deep fried, which I'm okay with that. Best parts, probably the little snack times. They have like deep fried cheese bread. They have like a lot of chocolate food and everything like that because they make cocoa there. The fruit there is really good. Worst part, beans and rice every single day. I still haven't looked at a plate of beans and rice. My host mother called me and she said, "We're eating beans and rice today." And I said, "You eat beans and rice every day." And then I know Mr. Mitchell brought his leadership class here, and I have to thank him for that because otherwise this room would probably be cut in half. So thank you everyone for coming out. I figured for the leadership class, talk to you a little bit about why being a foreigner makes you a better leader. Knowing what it's like to be in a position of vulnerability and knowing what it's like to be in a position where you're scared is a really great part of being a leader. Once you come back into that position where you're going to have to help people through stuff like that. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cough. Just a little bit. So knowing what it's like to be in a position of vulnerability and knowing what it's like to be scared, it's a huge part in being a leader and understanding what it's like to go through something and how it's like to not have to worry about something like that. So just to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes is probably one of the biggest parts I learned about being in Mr. Mitchell's leadership class. Confidence, you have to be confident in your own abilities, whether or not you actually are. Just to be able to portray a certain level of confidence is always important in any situation, because as soon as someone's looking to someone else and they see you and you're freaking out and you're crying in the corner, just like huddled up in a little ball, because I did that one time while I was in Brazil because I was scared. As soon as someone sees that, they're going to start freaking out too. So you don't want that to be happening. Just to be able to portray a level of confidence, even if it's a fake one, even if you're terrified on the inside, to be able to say like, I'm okay with this, to be able to show that you're okay with this, it's going to help everyone else get along. And it kind of sucks to do, but when you're a leader, you have to put yourself in positions where it's going to suck for you, but you're doing it for the better of the whole team in general. That's the bell. Thank you everyone for coming. Have a good time in class.